Complaints against edtech companies, especially Byju's, are piling up. Startups in the edtech sector are said to be facing a funding winter. Government authorities have expressed concern over malpractices in the sector. But despite everything, there is optimism too that edtech is here to stay. So what's happening here? Hello and welcome to the Federal's fortnightly webinar. I'm Prem Shankar. Today, we are going to discuss a very interesting and probably one of the most talked about sectors, the edtech sector. Education technology or edtech can be looked at from various angles, but the three main angles that are most pertinent for all stakeholders today include the business end of the sector. How are funders and investors looking at the sector? How are those who are running these startups, the founders looking at the sector in the prevailing conditions? The professional angle, how are teachers and professionals who are in the education sector look Sorry about the technical glitch in the beginning, but thank you all for joining us. I was just starting to say about how this sector, there are a lot of questions that are rising right now, and also about how there is optimism that it's a sector that's doing well. So let me quickly introduce the panelists. We are joined by Ms. Mayuri Ingle from Mumbai, co-founder of XQ. Ms. Praveena Chandrasekhar, journalist and educator, joining us from Chennai. Mr. Gaurav Parthi, founder and CEO of edtech company called Purple Tutor, joining us from Mumbai. And Mr. Sivasakti Balan, principal of KRM Public School, joining us from Chennai. And Mr. Giri Prakash, senior journalist and an expert on the edtech sector, joining us from Bengaluru. I welcome you all to this webinar. And before we go into the format of this show, here's a quick message to our viewers. If you're watching this broadcast live on our YouTube channel and our social media platforms, please do drop some questions that you may think you want answered. We will take up those questions during the course of the webinar. And now to kick off this webinar, the format of the show is simple. Each of the speaker gets about 3 to 4 minutes to make an opening remark and set the stage for the discussion later on. So let me begin with you, Ms. Mayuri Ingle. Can we get your opening remarks, and then we'll go one by one?
Sure. Just making sure I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So I don't really think that online education has reached a dead end. I do feel that it's here to stay, and there are good reasons that online education is here to stay. Finally, there's a reason why it picked up during COVID, but the good thing is that there has been a lot of acceptance towards these apps and these platforms in the past 2 years. There are a couple of reasons for that. I think there's access to a lot of skill sets and a lot of good teachers that you ordinarily would not get depending on where you're located. There's a lot of flexibility in the way that you can explore and learn topics. And you also have, if you're actually making use of technology the right way, you can tailor make these learning solutions so that they're suited for different kinds of learners. And therefore, I don't think that it's really a dead end as such, but more like a speed bump where we need to explore a couple of options at our end. Having said that, I do feel that the kind of learning environment that schools offer, the kind of bonding, the kind of inspiration that teachers are able to provide in an offline setting is not something that we can replace with online apps or platforms. And therefore, in my opinion, the best way to go forward is to figure out how we can complement the schooling system, how we can really understand what are the pain points for different kinds of learners and use technology to address these. And that is where the growth would actually come from, rather than doing a very hard sell and pushing the same solution or similar solutions to a very wide set of students, because all students are not the same. And we are trying to do something similar with video creation. And I honestly feel that a hybrid model is what would work best, at least for B2B online companies going forward.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ingle. That sets the stage as far as you're saying there is optimism there. It's not a dead end the way we were looking at it. But I'd like to go to Ms. Praveena Chandrasekhar. Ms. Chandrasekhar, as an educator, as a journalist yourself, and as a parent, as somebody who's been observing the sector, what are your opening remarks, please?
Okay, so I think I'm coming primarily from the side of the parent when I say this. I agree with most of what Mayuri said. The thing I felt was there is a great deal of fatigue, in the children with purely online learning platforms. So, and many of them wanted to go back to, the physical environment. And like Mayuri said, they enjoy that whole, the environment that school gives you, the bonding, the friendships, that is there. So, but I think to be very specific, there are certain children who are very comfortable with online learning, but a majority of them require the physical touch, the one-on-one with the teacher, the ability to physically look at the teacher and speak to the teacher and get inputs from there. I think, so the online works very well for some. Majority of them would like the physical space. So like Mayuri was saying, a hybrid model, yes, but I think primary learning inputs, I feel that.
I think we lost Ms. Chandrasekhar's connection. Let's wait for her to rejoin. Or we'll just continue. Mr. Shivashakti Balan, sir, the principal of KRM schools. So can you give us the school angle? That's one angle. That's something probably we all would want to hear from in this edtech discussion. You're on mute, sir. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, good evening, all of you. The topic itself is very interesting. Maybe there was time, the correct time, I think you are introducing this topic, because at the time of pandemic, when it was outburst, we teachers were in the, we did not know where we are going, how we are going to manage the things. We have to do something for the children, because continuously the children are out of the school and we have been isolated from the school. We have to do something. So physical reach is not possible. So where is the way? So when we are looking at it, interestingly, there are a lot of online apps came for our help, no doubt at all. So they have connected us with the children. Then when it was started with the lecture method, then every teacher is unique. Some teachers will be very much comfortable if they are doing it in a lecture method. Sometimes the teachers may be in storytelling method. Sometimes maybe some teachers may be very much particular about an interactive method. Some teachers always ask questions and expecting the children's feedback before they go to the next level. So how we are going to manage all these things? So that is a very big thing. And prior to it, how to equip our children digital, how to equip our teachers in utilizing the digital devices, right? Except using the phone just to make a call. We were not very much familiar with using the other apps and other things. Yes, there is no other way. System has had to be put back into it. So that's the reason that we are continuously working on it. And beginning stages, if you see first 3 months or 4 months, it's very difficult to convince the parents and bring the children into the streamline. If we get 20% of the attendance, that itself is a very big thing for us at that time. But later, gradually, even the parents as well as the children, they understood there is no other way. Then we have to do something. We have to do something for the continuity of the children's education. So they also joined. And of course, we have to be, we will be handicapped if there is no supportive apps are there. Like, some apps are coming out with the quiz format. Some apps are helping us to do the 3D format. There are visuals, not only picture visuals, there are the video sharing. So many things have come one after another, right? The manufacturers are really helping us a lot to make this online education, online connect with the children in a very happy note.
Thank you for that opening remark, Mr. Sivashakti Balan. I'll just go to Mr. Gaurav Parthi, again as a founder of an edtech company joining us from Mumbai. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Parthi. Your opening remarks, please.
Sorry, Prem, could you enable screen sharing? I just put some thoughts on a slide.
I'll ask my producer to help you with that.
Yeah, if you can just enable screen sharing, so I'll start off any which ways. If you can enable share screen, is it possible?
I'm just asking my producer to do that. You can go ahead, Mr. Parthi.
Sure. And I think the point is that, well, fundamentally, the way I look at it is edtech evergreen or not, right? And I think that's the point you also raised. And I think we've had a period of 2 years when COVID started. There was an acceleration on the edtech space from a funding standpoint, from a standpoint of the number of companies coming up in this space, right? And there was a lot of online learning happening per se. But unfortunately, what online learning meant to most people was installation of a Zoom license, right? And I think there is a fundamental difference, right? It's not just about a Zoom license. There are pedagogical shifts. When a teacher is in a classroom of 30 students, there is so much of, you have visual stimuli, you have sound stimuli available to you, right? Here we have just a small box in terms of a screen and the speakers. It's really difficult to figure out which student actually spoke in a class. And that's an operational difficulty you grapple with when you're in an online class, right, ultimately. Now, the point is that there have been fundamental shifts which have taken place in the last 2 years because of COVID and whatever we want to call it, right, at the end of the day. From a standpoint of what has happened the last couple of months and, while we are reconvening on the edtech sector and the negative press, yes, school reopenings have taken place, right? And I think it was more of a lot of eagerness of parents to send students back and students also wanting to go back. And I think offline centers or offline education has started gaining traction, or more so of a lot of people wanting to just go back because there was some bit of online fatigue, definitely. I think one of the other things that was missing was the whole social learning or the peer learning piece, which definitely happens in the offline. Now, it can happen in online, but like I said, there are pedagogical treatments which are required, which make sure that this happens. Ultimately, a classroom experience does have its own benefits, right? Which naturally occur without you really recognizing it or, really really building into the system. The other thing is that we have seen is a lot of negative news in terms of the environment, in terms of the funding. And yes, what has that meant? That there have been layoffs that have taken place. I'll just share if you can just see this. There have layoffs that have taken place. There have been shutdowns of businesses that have taken place. And yeah, there's been a lot of business realignment that has taken place generally by companies. They've sort of said, okay, we'll not go after the aggressive growth numbers, the hiring numbers, et cetera, right? And there's been a realignment that has taken place. So there are two broad events that I see that have actually taken place. Now, if I were to summarize in a way that what's been bad, right? The way I look at it, yeah, there have been shutdowns. Customers have been stranded. Customers, parents, students, learners have been affected. No doubt. You sort of go in a course somewhere, there are issues, right? Refunds have taken place because you've not met those delivery standards that you were promised, ultimately, right? And there are customers issues that have taken place. Why you had a lot of startups that were coming up, companies in this time period that were wanting to make solutions, but ultimately not really delivering up to the quality standards that parents were really wanting it. And ultimately they're seeing some sort of other areas, other people, other startups, other companies they can go to. Now, the way I look at it, what's good? Now, the way I look at it, there was actually a period of concentrated bad news. I think it was almost like a purge that has taken place in the market. You still are going to have bad news, maybe that continues, but I think it's like, the storm has really passed to some extent, right? The other part is that funding is still there for good businesses. If I were to compare H1 numbers of this year to H2, yeah, we're at about 60, 65%, 64% of those numbers. So it's down, but it doesn't mean that funding is not happening. It's happening for good businesses with good metrics being in place, right? The other thing which to note is market cycles generally have become shorter. When earlier you used to have a recovery periods, which used to be a couple of years, 4 years, 3 years, 5 years, they have become relatively shorter because the information percolation in the markets is much faster, right? And I think one of the things to realize is the last 2 years, there have been fundamental shifts that have taken place, right? What the digital adoption that could have taken possibly a much longer period, people were almost forced to do it. So today, I mean, I look at it, my parents and others, people who are sort of above 70 know how to use Zoom at the click of a button. And that's a fundamental shift that has taken place, right? Because people do know how to use it. Now, it's very difficult when you're having 26-year-olds in a class, how to manage them and how to treat them, how to get the pedagogy right. That's a different matter altogether. But you have made that shift. And the way I look at it, learners will always learn, right? EdTech companies are always going to survive. This is just like, Mayuri also said, it's a speed bump, it's a speed breaker. EdTech, I mean, will you expect that learners will stop learning?
Yeah, so Mr. Pati, I'm sure we'll get these points in as during the course of the discussion. So before I go to Mr. Giri Prakash, who may want to, sort of set the stage based on what both you, Mr. Pati, and Ms. Ingley have set the stage for in a very optimistic tone. The idea of taking this topic itself was mainly when we focused on the speed bumps that you were talking about. So before I get Mr. Giri Prakash in, I'd like to go back to Ms. Praveena Chandrasekhar. I think we lost your connection. Ms.
Yes.
You want to complete your opening remarks?
Yeah, so no, what I was saying is, I think the 2-year period, teachers were also going through a learning, right? Most of the teachers were not comfortable with the online space. So we have to take that into account. I think they will also get better with it as they get more familiar with the medium. And but of course, I personally do feel that learning to some extent has been affected. Learners will always learn, yes, but then to cater to the children who need that additional help. So online learning, I think, ideally will become, a positive complement to a physical situation. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for that. Mr. Giri Prakash, you've heard all these angles, and I'm sure in your interactions you've had many other angles also coming in, which is regulatory, the authorities, and how do you? Initially, let me begin by asking your opening remark based on all the other statements we've heard now.
Yeah. So I think what is the theme of this discussion webinar is that have this edtech startups reached a dead end. Now, let me go back to the pandemic era. Those 2 years, as Mr. Pati said, it led to an acceleration of these edtech startups, online classes. And what happened during that period? It was a necessity that school children wanted some online classes like this. And most of the issues arose out of that. A whole lot of startups in the edtech space came into being. And one could see that almost on a weekly basis, somebody or the other kept getting funding. And if you look at Byju's, those 2 years actually turned Byju's from a unicorn into something much bigger. And they started acquiring a lot of companies. One could see them acquiring offline edtech companies as well. So almost every investor assumed that this is the way to go. But what happened after 2 years? Schools reopened and reality set in. Now, the challenge for edtech companies now is, what do we do with the school children, the high acquisition cost that has gone into it, the pricing model that has gone into it. How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we tweak our model to stay relevant? Now, I think that's a big challenge for a whole lot of edtech companies. As Mr. Pati said, that it is fine that you really need learners will always learn, as he's talked about. That is absolutely true. But today, let's go back to this case where when the pandemic was on, the schools were closed. So you had the whole day that edtech companies could capture for themselves as far as students are concerned. Now they go to the school and then they come back to the edtech classes or maybe tuitions or whatever. How do they manage their free time? I think that's a big challenge for the students, the parents, as well as edtech companies. I think therein lies the challenge. And if we are talking about have they reached a dead end, I think it is relevant to that kind of a nature. So we should actually look at how edtech companies are going to reinvent themselves, how they are going to tweak the model, and how they are very cost effective, so that the students and the parents don't feel that they are intruding into their daily lives or the kind of money they have earmarked for their children's education.
Yeah, that's interesting, Mr. Giriprakash. I mean, you're saying that, in a way, you're giving it a nice sort of bent where you're saying that it's not a dead end, but it could be a dead end if they don't reinvent. And, I'll take it from there, Ms. Mayuri. You did set the tone of optimism there, but I think Mr. Giriprakash is sort of bringing in a very pertinent point. So, yeah, it may not be a dead end unless there is the urgent need for reinventing is looked at. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do, because I think the reason why edtechs have also been struggling is because there's been, like I said, a lot of them are offering very similar solutions, and there's a lot of competition amongst the same set of parents and customers that they're targeting. There's been the courses, while selling courses, it's a hard sell. You're not really selling a learning solution. They have been productized, commoditized, and in the process, what happens is that you're just looking at growth wherever it comes from, which is not necessarily sustainable, and that's kind of really thrown a spanner in the works, so to say. And if we really want to, so one is definitely to reevaluate what the business model is. It's something very different from what we are doing, to be honest, because we have a B2B model. But this is something that a lot of B2C edtechs are definitely struggling with, because we are targeting the same customers. We have the same channels. We are spending a lot of money into marketing, cost of acquisition, and how do you really recover this money year on year on a sustainable basis while meeting the growth numbers that you have? That is the challenge. And there I feel like there is actually an opportunity for you to look at how you can add value, because finally the growth is going to come in from you delivering effective learning outcomes, rather than saying the same thing that 10 other companies are saying, that is that I'm going to help you score great marks. Maybe you look at the different kind of tools that are there to engage with different kinds of kids, because if there are 100 kids in a class, all of them are not going to top the class. There is a big bulk of kids that are learning in different ways. What are the ways in which you can engage with these kids who want to probably explore different fields, look at probably secondary professions that are not mainstream, or what are the formats that you can use to help these kids learn their regular subjects. So we use video creation to help different kinds of kids learn better, and we use video creation techniques to help them create projects based on their academic subjects, which we feel is a great way to engage kids for whom this is already a natural language. And that is something that we are doing to, really help kids learn in a different way and engaging with a different generation of kids. So that's been the approach that we have taken. There can be a lot of other ways that we can add value to the learning process. And that's a challenge that all these companies will really have to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting the way you put it. Mr. Pati, do you agree with the fact that, there are two things here. One is, as Ms. Mayuri Ingle said, there is a clear need to sort of reinvent, but reinventing from what angle? In the sense that, would you look at it from learning from the mistakes in terms of the business approach that the edtech organizations had, or the functional approach, or the end result approach? The where are you reinventing yourself in the way you're setting your sight?
Very good points, I think, Mr. Shankar. So I think there are lots of deeper questions within what you have asked, right? Firstly, I think obviously some bit of reinvention is definitely required. I think like Mr. Giri Prakash sort of brought up a very, very core part of the tech industry, the acquisition costs, right? And they have to be within reasonable means. The strategy of growth at any cost will not fly through. Right? And it's going to be growth with good metrics. Ultimately, that will be the way forward. So the answer to your question, rather, if financially you may need to restructure yourself, yes. And I think the answer is that strategy where you were sort of just simply burning money and you didn't really care about acquisition costs, that's not going to fly through. You will need to maintain the LTV to CAC or whatever, the long-term value that you can get over a customer versus the cost that you sort of spend, the money that you spend to acquire the customer. Those ratios will have to be right. Those sort of metrics will have to be right. You'll have to have the right margins in the business because, investors will come in, or if you to run a profitable business, you need to get those metrics right. So I think that is going to be a fundamental shift in terms of how businesses go forward here at least for the next couple of years, because those are the businesses that are going to be able to either, prosper and grow from strength to strength or even get funding, right? And there is going to be a reinvention required from a business standpoint. Now, secondly, when you come to the business model, I think where you were talking about, right? And I think that's at the very core. So you're going to see those startups which just mushroom because of momentum and all the other things of the COVID, happening, and everybody was sort of wanting a solution in that tech space. Those startups are going to sort of fall, and ultimately we have seen that that thing coming through, right? They're falling because there's lack of funding coming through, or your business metrics are just not right. You just sort of funding dries up, and you have to shut shop. So you have to fundamentally solve a problem for the learner, right? Now, ultimately, if you look at beyond K-12, there's reskilling, upskilling, and you've got to get a degree and you can get a job or you can get a raise in your salary. That's what people look for, right? And when you look at the K-12 space, like what Mr. English said, right? Ultimately, can you get better marks, right? And what sort of parent looks for, right? I'm going to engage this platform or one could be better marks. The other could be, am I learning something which is sort of extracurricular, a chess or maybe computer science or whatever, right? And those platforms will really have to focus on getting the outcomes right. Now, if you're an online platform, simply installing a Zoom license and having a teacher is not going to cut it, right? Because like I said, there are pedagogical differences. And like what we do is ensuring personalization with AI in the class along with teachers. Now, if you can deliver the right outcomes, you're solving something for the learner, because ultimately, what are you doing? You're getting better outcomes. You're making sure engagement is good. You're actually ensuring that hopefully the learner has learned something. The students have learned something, right? So you're going to have those business models that are functionally also right, which are solving something for the customer. So there are going to be two rejigs. And I think you've said it absolutely right, Mr. Shankar, that there is going to be a business side, the financial re-engineering that will have to take place from a going forward standpoint. And secondly, the businesses also will have to solve for the end user, clearly.
So, yeah. So I'd like to go to Mr. Shivashakti Balan. So you are seeing this from the ground level. Both Mr. Pati and Ms. Ingle are looking at it from a very different approach, although they have to, by virtue of the business they are, and they have to understand what's happening at the ground level. But your perspective becomes important. You are working with the students. COVID, the pandemic is sort of waning. We have learned how to live with it. Children have started coming to school. You have seen that era of how students and teachers had to deal with it. Like Mr. Chandrasekhar was saying, teachers were having to learn. And things are changing now. You're seeing students in your school. How much do you think, just like how Mr. Pati was saying, functionally they have to change? Where do you think they have to change? And do you think this change right now is going to be the next level of this hybrid model that Ms. Ingle was talking about? You're on mute, sir. Can you please unmute yourself?
The content producers, they can look in the different way. As Mr. Giri was telling you, they can reinvent themselves. So nowadays we are looking for the publishers, those who are providing the ebooks. So in that way, they are helping us. They are continuing their online support to us. And apart from that, nowadays in this competitive world, the parents' expectation is more. They are not only depending on the schools for providing the information, they are looking for even the online information after the regular school hours also. So there, to fulfill their expectations, of course, it is very much necessary. Even though we are talking about socialization in the classrooms, we are talking about the peer learning in the classroom, all these things are there. But even though, when they are moving towards a higher education, there is a requirement for these type of supports, no doubt at all. And another thing, even in the regular classrooms now, as the hybrid learning they are talking about, and blended learning we are talking about. So some of the notes and I think which can be a time consuming to deliver it within the regular classrooms, that we are taking the support of these online apps and other things like Google Classrooms and other things. So that is somewhat helping us, and conducting the examinations regularly, maybe GK based examinations. And I think that's really, it is wonderfully, it is helping us. It's a really supportive tools in that. And parents, of course, the parents are also thinking about alternative sources of information, because they are developing their children not only within the small sphere of the world, they want to expand themselves.
So yeah, that's an important angle, the parents' angle too. Ms. Praveena Chandrasekhar, you were talking about the teachers having to learn. Mr. Shivashakti Balan is bringing in both the other angles here, the students' angle as well as the parents' angle. And do you think this reinvention, as Mr. Pati was talking about in terms of functional, how practically, how possible it's going to be, and application-wise, do you think it's going to really change the way you have seen it happen on the ground in the pandemic time? And how do you think it will fare in the post-pandemic?
Okay. So this online learning, and in terms of, they were talking about it from the business angle. So it will continue to be there. It will continue to be attractive for the the high achievers and people who are focused on the marks. And
okay, I think the connection is bad again. Sorry, very sorry about that. I hope we'll be able to get Mr. Chandrasekhar back. Mr. Gimkar, you're back? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm back.
Okay, yeah,
I'll just complete that quickly. Yeah, so all of that will continue. But where the challenge is, I think a lot of schools were facing this challenge is there is the kids have lost track of what it's like to present themselves and how they should behave in a classroom situation, right? So a lot of schools are facing an issue with this lack of understanding, or they've forgotten things like hierarchy, right, when they've come back into the physical situation. So that is actually, parents are a little worried about that whole thing of kids not being able to deal with others in a physical situation, and that will never come in an online situation because it's a very different medium, right? So we'll keep aside the high achieving students and the children who are focused on the marks. That will always, you'll always have this bunch of kids who are focused on that, and they will continue to look for these additional inputs online or anywhere else. But I think a lot of parents want to go away from this medium for this reason, that they've seen this sitting with gadgets for a long period of time. And if you look at the middle level schools, where a lot of children, they can't afford personal laptops and stuff, so they were spending a lot of time on tiny phones, looking into those tiny gadgets. And so overall, so all of that I mean, I don't think can the the companies sort this out for them. I don't know, but these will all be concerns for the parents, and I think that is actually a challenge, right? So, which is why a lot of parents and teachers want to move away from that medium.
All right.
Yeah.
So, but there is also what both Ms. Ingle was trying to say is that, and Mr. Parthi was trying to say is that there is a need for reinventing. So when that reinvention happens, will these challenges be addressed? But I'll come to you in the next round for that. I'd like to quickly go to Mr. Giri Prakash. What are we missing here, Mr. Giri Prakash? Both Ms. Ingle and Mr. Parthi have agreed that this is a time for reinvention. But there is also a sense that things are not going right. Even last month, there were reports about how the government had expressed concerns over companies like Byju's, which filing complaints, and all these things have. What are we missing here? As an edtech companies do understand that there is a need for reinvention. It's still work in progress after pandemic has sort of waned and students have started going to school. But still. There are issues. What are these issues?
I think if you look at certain edtech companies, it's not a sweeping generalization here. There is a sense of desperation, born out of the fact that investors are really getting them to do a lot of things which their model doesn't actually permit them to. One could actually see a Byju setting up a physical class. Now it defeats the very purpose of having an edtech online class, right? Now, why do you want to do that? You are becoming another school or a college where actually students go after their school hours, go to that place, and then again they are taught and they are back at 10 o'clock or whatever it is, right? So I would like to ask Ms. Ingle and Mr. Parthi, what are the investors telling you? Are they saying that they're coming up with conditions saying that if you need another round of funding, and maybe not to these two startups, but others as well, what is the market report say regarding funding? And is it now easier to get funding now that one believes that edtech companies will actually exist?
Mr. Parthi, you want to go first?
Sure, no problem. So I think from an investor standpoint, I think there's at least from ours, we've been a business which have really managed costs and our growth and margins, right? So we've been sort of slightly away from the pack, Mr. Giri Prakash, and from we've had very supportive investors at our end, but obviously there is a bit of so-called funding winter, like you rightly mentioned. And I think the point being, what are investors saying? Are they sort of really rejigging your models? I think the way I look at it, most investors do not try to get into business strategy. Obviously, they may have some inputs in terms of driving and getting the business, achieving the right metrics. It does at times become dangerous if investors sort of start getting and changing the business strategy, right? I think like you sort of also hinted upon, right, to rechange the business model. So I think it's also in startups' interest to have the right business partners with them. And think for us personally, we've been very blessed to have the right kind of investors on our cap table, right? And I think that's the way I personally see it. That if you have the right investors on your cap table, you are not going to sort of reject the business models. Yeah, you may have to reinvent basis the times. I think that is more pertinent today, right? And I think the way you need to look at it is that what are the next set of milestones that you're looking at from a business growth, from a customer solution standpoint, right? Because ultimately business growth is a byproduct of the customer solution that you're getting out in the market, right? It's not the reverse. Unfortunately, a lot of companies sort of assume the reverse, right? Business growth means customer solution is in place because you're pumping a lot of money to get customers. That's not really the case. And I think those business models that really serve the customer, having the right solution now, whether that is personalization, whether that is addressing mental health or whatever are the models that are sort of going around, and like what Ms. Chandrasekhar also said, that I think the word I look at it is social learning, where you really realize, how to really interact with others. And those startups are going to be the business models that are the way forward now. Whether you can do that in the online class, whether it's the hybrid model, that's a different issue altogether. But the right business models with the right metrics are the ones that are going to go forward, is what I personally see. And that's my input. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Prati. Ms. Ingle, about the investor angle that Mr. Prakash was asking about.
Yeah, I think as far as having supportive investors go, fortunately, we are in the same boat. And with the seed fund raise, at least we've been lucky to have investors who've really been supportive of the kind of tweaks that we have made to the business model. For us, I think because we are trying something fairly new, it's been important for them to see proof of concept and to really see that the product is working, because we are not really offering something that already exists in the market. So for us, it's going to be critical that we prove that this is a solution that's working for schools, to see the adoption across different regions. And we've already worked on a business model that is sustainable. We've been tweaking it for the last 6 months to ensure that when we get from 5 schools to 100 schools to 500 schools, we are not really burning cash. So I think that way we seem to be on the right path. And therefore, there's more interest in seeing what the growth curve is going to be like for us in terms of adoption, rather than really putting pressure on us to acquire customers in that sense.
Thank you. Just going a little deeper into this issue of the bad news that we were sort of hearing about the edtech sectors, and I thought I'll bring in Mr. Shivashakti Balan here. So we have been hearing stories about hard selling that's been happening by the edtech companies. They're sort of getting extremely aggressive when they're trying to sell their modules, when they're trying to sort of put down students and say that unless you learn this, you're not going to achieve anything substantial in life. So have you seen this happen? I know both Ms. Ingle and Mr. Perthi from the industry have sort of looked at this, and they've sort of given a very nice perspective as to how going forward what should change. But from your point of view, sir, do you think this thing is changing? This thing that looks really bad in terms of functionally, that companies are coming in hard selling, they're trying to become extremely aggressive. Are you facing this? Do you think this is and do you think this will change, or it should change? You're on mute again, sir. Sorry.
Of course, because when more companies are coming inside, and here is a big thing, big question is about the quality. Are they delivering a quality content to us? Are this quality is being affordable by us? So there are issues are happening, and many people in the name of startups, they are starting this company. Whatever they learn, they are trying to reproduce the children without thinking about the updations, without thinking about the students' expectations, requirement, and the other thing. So that can be looked into. And moreover, parents' point of view, of course, they need a lot of things, but at the same time, everything they are not ready to depend on online alone. As Pravina ma'am has pointed out, there are the real experience of learning, which the children have missed last 2 years. And that is, when they have started using the apps and other things, unknowingly, they are being exposed to a lot of unwanted things and other things. That is being reflected here now as a behavioral issues, what we are facing now to the children. Are the children are really developing their values? Are they practicing their values? Those things are all the big concern. So the edutech companies, they should not be restricting themselves with only the content providers or information providers. Apart from that, what they are trying to give it to the children or students, that matters a lot. That's what I think, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very pertinent point there as to what should be looked at. Ms. Chandrasekhar, do you think that going forward, these, like you were saying, the social angle coming into the whole edtech aspect and the hybrid models that have been discussed right now, do you think it's really going to work in the sense that there are business pressures that like we've been talking about right now, but there is also like Mr. Shivashakti Balan is saying, that there is a need to comprehensively look at how this education is being imparted. Do you think this balance can be sort of achieved in future?
Okay, so I think actually I have a question on this also, but my submission is that probably these companies should not promise the moon to the students and parents, and like as if it's a mass solution that will work for everybody. A lot of them do that, but I'd like to ask Ms. Mayuri and Mr. Patti, is it possible, business wise, would it make sense to make this whole thing a very, a little more niche and more focused on the children who need it or who want it rather, and who are capable of handling all of this, right? Not from a money point of view, but from the whole thing of spending so many hours in school, coming back and some kids can do it. They do it very well. But when this is offered as a solution across the board for everybody, I think that's where the problem comes, because the expectations are different. And when the children are not able to cope, then that causes a lot of mental stress. So I feel that going forward, they will also have to address this when they reinvent, because ultimately that is what will, people will continue to patronize them. Parents will look at them as a solution only if they're able to address this. But I'd like one of them to kind of look at, answer this also. If
Sanjay, would you like to go
I can take that. Yeah. So I can talk about what we've done to address this. And we are actually looking at the online part of the solution that we are offering to help kids to continue learning at home. And we've built the solution in such a way. So essentially what we do is we create a video lab setup for schools. We give them all the equipment, the curriculum content, and there is a platform that we provide for schools to then continue the learning at home. So when they're in the school, they actually have the school environment where they're able to learn these concepts with the faculty in a physical setting, use the equipment, we handhold them, they see what their peers are doing. And that is setting the foundation for these concepts. And when they go back home, to help them continue this, to explore it at their own pace throughout the week, and to really try out things depending on what their interests are, we have a platform where we nudge them and give them the kind of recognition that they would want for all the effort that they are putting in. So that's how we've looked at it, where the online is not really like a blocked time every day that they have to go online and attend an online class an hour. The learning happens physically, but the reinforcement and an exploration of those topics happens in an online format that is self-paced, and they can really take it at their own, based on their own schedules and what their interests are. So that's something that we are trying to do.
Mr. Patti?
Sure, I'll also attempt. I think, like Ms. Chandrasekhar said, I think the point is, if you're hard selling a product, maybe the product itself is weak, right? That's why you need to hard sell, right? Ultimately, you really can't hard sell it. The product needs to really solve a problem, then it should sell with a little bit of support, because, when a parent is spending 10,000, 20,000 or more money, you do need to talk to somebody to actually figure out and get the comfort. Like, listen, this is what I want to spend the money for, right? And the point is that when you're doing such things, like she said, online class, yeah, I can give you from our standpoint, like, what Ms. Ingle said, that what we look to do is, unlike other platforms, where does the problem occur? You hire a teacher which is not really up to the mark. You've bought in Zoom and you've thought you've got online, right? If you have your right teachers, at the same time, the pedagogy and ensuring that you're personalizing the class. Now, ultimately, what do? We're sort of one of the world's first platform that has AI in the class supporting teachers. We're not eliminating teachers, right? At the end of the day. Now, what we are saying is we're trying to replicate the best teachers. All of us were in college or school, and we know that the best teachers we remember were possibly 1 out of 10 or maybe 1 or 2 out of 20, right? The 5-10%, not more, right? And they had certain traits, like they could connect to you, right? Now, for example, in our AI, what we simply do is we detect, like, for example, if a student is weak in communication, the teacher will be told real time that, listen, spend more time explaining the concept or give a simpler explanation of this particular concept to the child. Now, ultimately, what are you trying to do? You're trying to personalize the experience. So one size does not fit all. You cannot. Every learner, every student has to be treated differently. And that is what we do in our platform to ensure that engagement levels are up. So the way I look at it, the top end students who are the best and they're the brightest, they are anyway going to be so hungry, they will strive and they will do everything. These online platforms will not be able to do much for them anyway, right? Because they're so sort of hungry for knowledge and they're preparing for competitive exams, etc. But the other side, which are, let's say, not scoring so well, can you get their grades up? Who are really at the, the middle, they're really just the average part, just about scraping through. Can you get them up and arouse interest in subjects? See, ultimately, there are different solutions, because the ones who are just passing through probably are just not interested, and there are certain other issues with them. You need to arouse interest. The ones who are at possibly 60, 70% scoring, and you want to get them to much higher grades, you want to really sharpen their skills, get them more interested in the topic. So it's like horses for courses, right? Ultimately, what we seek to do in our platform is personalization. And that personalization we feel is right for the learner. So it gets them to the right learning outcome at the end of the day. So yeah, that's the way we look at it. So you really have to personalize the learner's journey when you're looking at online classes. And this gets very, very, very complex when you're having multiple learners, right, at the class, like one teacher, multiple students, and you're looking at a cost-effective solution, right? And that's where real problems start coming in. And then it's difficult to sort of replicate a classroom experience.
All right. Yeah. I mean, both of you have sort of addressed the issue Ms. Chandrasekhar was raising, but since Ms. Chandrasekhar, you have raised the question, I have to ask you, are you convinced with the answer?
Kind of, but I also want to know, so supposing you look at, maybe if you don't target like really young children, do you think that will help in some way? Because the older kids are, they've already reached a stage where they are focused, they know what they want, they're chasing something, and they might be okay with it. But really young children, like, offering coding to class 6 children and stuff like that, if you don't do things like that, will that make a difference? I'm asking, as a parent. There are obvious concerns there. So I don't know if that will help in some way.
I'd like to add to that question too. When you're talking about the sort of age group, I'm also looking at the social sort of setup that these students are coming from. And how do you address which students are we trying to address? Are we looking at the socioeconomic class that they represent? Are we looking at lower middle class, upper middle class? Is that even factored in all those aspects that you just, in your first answer to Ms. Chandrasekhar?
So I think that's one of the advantages that online education offers, that it allows us to customize the learning solutions that we offer. And it's something that we definitely try to take into account. And obviously, as we scale, it does become a challenge, to be very, very honest. Finally, I cannot offer the same solution to a school in a metro that I would offer to somebody, even in a tier 2 town for that matter. And I think it calls for really understanding what kind of content these kids consume, what is the way to connect with these kids. And that is the solution that is actually relevant for those kids. I was thinking about the use of technology as Ms. Chandrasekhar was talking about, figuring out what is the right age to teach certain skills to kids. And at least based on my interactions with parents, I feel like there really is no escaping screen time in this day and age. And I was also thinking about how it was different when we were growing up, or parents, for example. And I think back then there was television. Right now we have mobile phones. Obviously, the universe is very different. I am comparing apples to oranges, but I think the way to address it is to probably set boundaries rather than not really restrict their access or try to discipline them, but really explain how they can coexist with technology or use technology or screen time in a more productive, in a more creative way, rather than either if you are concerned that they are just idly consuming content. A lot of time kids are actually looking up learning content. I think that's just how they learn today. If they want to find out something about a particular topic, they do go to YouTube, and that's just become the default behavior. So I think a little bit of empathy and also trying to understand how they are using technology can go a long way in, becoming partners in helping them have a healthy relationship with technology. That's what I had to say.
Mr. Perthi.
Yeah, sure. I'll break it up into two parts to Ms. Chandrasekhar's question. One is that at what age, and then let's try and see why after that age, right? So firstly, to the first question, I think we've typically seen online learning at 6 years of age is the bare minimum you need. Bare minimum I'm talking right now. Why 6 years of age, right? And the reason is very clear. There are two clear reasons for it. One, at that age, you have the ability to follow instructions. And number two, you have the attention span to actually sit through a class. So that's the age we look at personally at our side in our company. And that's the particular age that we particularly start. And because of this reason, and this is a research-based reason. Now, why after this age and why is it very important? There is a well-known Piaget theory actually, which typically states between ages of 6 to 50. Now, 0 to 5 is 5-6 is also very significant cognitive development that takes place in the child. But the 6 to 15 years of age is also extremely relevant, and it's extremely important that there is a large degree of cognitive development that takes place in the child. So for us, the 6 to 15 years becomes a very, very pertinent age that we start offering solutions to. And that's the age segment that we actually operate in. So there's a technical angle to the segment that we operate in. And these are the reasons behind it.
All right. So, Ms. Chandrasekhar, it's technical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, Mr. Balan, I wanted to, ask you, as in terms of the hybrid version that now looks like that's where we are heading. Do you think that will be? Is that something that you've tried out at your school? Is it working right now, or do you think you're going to try? So you're on mute.
Yeah, by Max it's working because as I told you, so for 40 minutes that time that we could have saved, anything related to writing and any extra sources, if you want to share it with the children, it is easy for us to share it through online. And no doubt that even the new education policy which is going to come, they are also discussing about integrated online learning. So it's going to be inevitable. It is going to be the part of the learning pedagogy, whether we are using it or not. But how far it is going to support us? I'm looking at this as it's not a substitute, but it is a supportive. So online can be a supportive things, and to make mostly the visual learners are really getting a lot of benefit about it. Regular classroom, they cannot be repeated, but if it is a visual thing, then again and again children can look into it, and they could have enriched themselves. It can be a good revision for them also.
And just to sort of put the question that Ms. Chandrasekhar was asking to Mr. Perthi and Ms. Ingle, to you, sir, do you think there is a certain need to look at what age group gets into this whole hybrid system that you're talking about?
And primarily, if you are talking about pre-primary and primary, they are also getting a lot of audio-visual learning. That's a very highly supportive to them, no doubt at all. Suppose if you want to explain about the effect of volcano to children, that we can play it at the primary level or pre-primary level. A lot of audio visuals can be shared, even the pre-primary level also. I don't think that age is not a big criteria here.
Okay.
But only one thing is that how the children are getting affected out of, when they are going out of the boundary, how these online medium are sharing unwanted things to the children. That is a very big concern to all the adults here.
At what level is this? Does this need to be checked, Mr. Perthi and Ms. Ingle? I mean, I think repeatedly Mr. Balan has brought up this point. So at what level can this be checked? Does this come under your radar?
For us, it definitely does. I think the way to deal with it or manage it is to so there is an option for YouTube Kids if there are very young kids. That is an option that they've created, at least for videos consumption. The other way is to either have a shared account or accounts or supervised accounts, so that you at least have an idea of what the online behavior is like. But like I was saying, I don't think that it's really possible to keep them in a cocoon after a certain age in today's day and age. Like after kids are 9 or 10 today, even if I am restricting them at home, they have exposure to kids in school, at coaching classes. So I think having an open conversation about this and understanding what their online behavior is like with a manageable level of supervision is probably the way to do it. Because if you're just going to put like a blanket supervision on what is happening, that might not be the best way to deal with it either. Right? That's my opinion.
Yeah, Mr. Pratik?
I think Mayuri has said more or less what I wanted to say, but I think it's two parts, right? One is to ensure that you don't get exposed, and the other part is if you do get exposed, then what's the way to manage it, right? And I think restricting has some advantages, but like I said, I mean, I always say if you restrict a child for something, he's always more eager to get into it and find out, right? What is it all about, right? So I think you need to have those controls in place, and we sort of have put them, and we've given teachers training, to ensure that you don't have any untoward incident. And then if there is something like that, how to deal with it. I think the bigger issue is that if something like this happens, how do you deal with it? So like I think Mayuri said, it's the right conversations. And I think being open about it and making sure the person understands what's happening. Because today you can't really restrict information, right? You just sort of switch off the tap here, but there are 20 other taps also available, right? At the end of the day, I mean, there's whether you call it information overload or information is today available at fingertips, right? I mean, so it's really, you can't stop it. I think you need to just have the right attitude to manage the problem and ensure that at the same time the problem does not occur.
Yeah. So, Mr. Giriprakash, I think we briefly lost your connection. So we have discussed the sort of the age angle when I think we lost your connection as to which age group. That's what we were discussing on in terms of which age group is it. We've even got some responses on our YouTube which says that it seems to be failing at the primary level, but it seems to be working at the secondary and higher secondary levels. Your views on it, Mr. Giriprakash?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. You get more serious as you grow older when it comes to classes. So obviously there are more takeaways from these kind of classes, and they cut down on their sporting activities and they focus on it. It's a far more competitive world. Say even 2 years ago, I mean, pandemic has changed a lot of things. There's been a paradigm shift in the way even institutions or even corporates look at hirings. So I assume the competition is very high, and obviously there is a leaning towards becoming more serious. So therefore, maybe secondary and even high school students are taking more to it. But there is something that I also wanted to put forth with regard to the dark side of these edtech startups. We know that a whole lot of parents have gone to consumer courts seeking the fees back. And we know that the way they sell these edtech classes to unsuspecting parents is there have been a whole lot of such cases where they first talk down to the parents and then to the students and tell them that they are not good for anything at all, and then they say that this is the way if you join our class and this is what you're going to get. So they overpromise a lot, and this has led to a huge amount of depression among students and stuff like that. I think this is a very, very important area that edtech startups should look into it and see to it that they don't overpromise. I do understand you really need the acquisition cost is so high that you really need a whole lot of students to actually see to it that you are at least not profitable, at least there is a break even there, and you need to get back to the investors, right? The amount of money that they invest in these kind of startups. I would like to focus more on that, and I would like to talk about how some of these startups have have become some kind of a cesspool for scams. And we really need to know how do these startups manage these things, how to avoid these kind of pitfalls, and also see to it that all these startups, for example, all the founders, obviously they are very well educated and they have gone through the same grind as any other students have. So I am sure there must be a lot of empathy towards them. How do you tackle these kind of issues and see to it that today edtech startups, there is a cleaner image for them than what is being painted about?
Before I get Ms. Ingles and Mr. Perthy's reaction to that question, Giri Prakash, it's a very, very pertinent question that you asked. But let me get quickly the views of Ms. Chandrasekhar and Mr. Balan. Ms. Chandrasekhar, Mr. Giri Prakash has raised a very interesting point there. He said that how do they deal with these ills of the negative aspect of tech companies that have widely been now been read about. Would you like to add your points as to what you expect? And we can get both Ms. Ingle and Mr. Perthy to sort of answer that question that Mr. Giri Prakash has raised.
See, after all, the companies are driven by it's a business decision in many cases for them. But I feel that parents and teachers they have to really up their skills in this regard and be more aware. Parents particularly have to be really vigilant on what solutions they're looking for and who they're looking to provide that solution to their child. Because ultimately, I think that decision has to be taken by the parent rather than blindly looking at. In fact, I would be very wary of anything that promises the moon to my child, because we as parents are, will be able to what kind of pressure how they take. So I think the parents and teachers should look at that very actively. And I think the awareness must come on that side. You can't, of course, the edtech companies, we've seen their hard sell and the marketing campaigns, but ultimately who's doing, parents have to be vigilant. That's what I feel.
Okay, Mr. Balan, what is your expectation to the question that Mr. Giri Prakash has raised? Would you like to add on to it?
As for any business is concerned, consumers' expectation matters a lot. What the consumer is expecting. So I'd like to tell that before preparing the edtech things and other things, there can be a good survey can be done according to the region. Region-wise, there are differences are there. Region-wise, there are cultural. They have their unique features. Suppose if it is CBSE, the content must start mapped with the expectations of the NCERTs. So those things, if it is being included, that would be good. And the learners are all the variety of learners are there. Their skills, their compatibility, their competency, those things can be taken into account by these service providers. It would have been a better one. And of course, it need to be a futuristic one. New education policy, they are reframing everything. So if it is done with keeping those policies in the mind, it could have been much more useful to us.
Thank you, Mr. Balan. Ms. Ingle, do you want to go first, and then I'll go to Mr. Perth?
Sure. Yeah. I think as founders, we have the responsibility to set the foundation right for the business and the sales teams. So I think when we are the ones that actually set the selling process. And if at that point, we create a very different process from one that is a hard sell or that's a very push-based, FOMO-based process, that is the start point of setting things right. So if I actually ask my sales team to focus on understanding what the child's experience was in the class, what are the pain points of the school, what are the pain points of the parent, and then use that to tailor their spiel or their pitch. I personally feel that that is a much effective way to sell the solution. You are being transparent about what you are offering the parents. You are coming from a place of empathy, and that also sets the foundation for all the teams that report into these sales managers. And at that point, I think if you make it clear that you don't want to missell or you don't want to oversell, then that solves for a lot of issues. Because for me, and I think for us as a brand, I think we want to keep a foundation that's sound for the years to come. And I don't want to have to face this issue of, a lot of dissonance and a lot of complaints coming in because we oversold the product. I'm already working very hard to offer a very good product. So I want to make sure that I am communicating that effectively and clearly, delivering on the promises that I'm making. And then that becomes my foundation for business to come, and not really, pushing back. But I have to say that it takes a lot of courage to take that stand also. And I can imagine that it is not easy to, maintain that stand over a sustained period of time, because there are pressures. But that, I feel like that is the way to address this issue.
All right, Mr. Parthi.
Yeah. So I think just a couple of things. So one is obviously, there are obviously news of fear selling and fear-based selling, and where you create that, FOMO, like Ms. English said. Now, the point is, I fundamentally believe no parent should be cheated very clearly. And you do need to deliver the expectations you're setting in front of parents. And that's typically why a refund would take place, or why a customer would be dissatisfied. Refund is an outcome of dissatisfaction, actually, right? Ultimately, it's not the first step, right? I think edtech companies need to get that right. Example, in our company, I was the salesperson for the first 70 customers, by the way. I onboarded them, I sort of spoke to them, got the course and got their whatever, money in, etc., right? We have a zero tolerance policy on mis-selling. We don't really appreciate it. And we really, in our system, we really monitor. Our refunds are like less than 1%, means like 1 in 100. Very, very low, right? It's genuine reasons we do realize in those cases, right? But overall, I think while we may be whatever we are, but I think the industry also has a responsibility to ensure that this happens, right? You do stand for a brand, and you do want your customers to learn and learners to learn, right? So I think there is a lot of top-down. It's a lot about founder-driven approaches, and where you put a full stop in terms of making sure that, it is a difficult part to work on, like Ms. English said. But it's a part that you do need to walk on to be in the right. Ultimately, it's black and white in this case, right? And I think it is a lot about the culture that you create, right? And the right culture will yield benefits. I think some of these are short-term strategies. Ultimately, the customer stays with you in the long-term why. Ultimately, if you deliver and you promise, right? Whatever you promise or you deliver it, right?
Yeah.
If that matches, the customer stays with you. Otherwise, you're going to lose the customer along the journey. Very clear. He'll not stay with you.
Yeah, that's a pretty straightforward response. But Mr. Giri Prakash, one thing that's really sort of bothering probably anybody who's looking at this sector is how a leader in this sector is behaving, right? We are seeing massive acquisitions happening on one side, and then we are seeing, the smaller players, trying very hard. Are they tying themselves up in knots? That's the sense you're getting. And will this be? It's very nice to hear Mr. Parthi and Ms. Ingley talking about how hard they're working towards setting this right. But if the sector is sort of being derailed or being taken in a completely different direction by probably some leaders in this business, where is it headed in that case? And that's probably coming back to the premise of this whole discussion.
I'm going to be a bit harsh on this. If you look at, there was this earlier conversation regarding secondary schools and high schools, and beyond that as well. So look at the IIT JEE results that came out recently. Look at the other competitive exam results that came out recently, including the topmost. None of them actually advertised that some of the students actually got into the top 10 or top 100. So what exactly does it show? Right? It was either one of the offline schools, the coaching classes, or something else. Okay. So what is it? What does it actually teach us? What does it tell us? Right. So I think that needs to be pondered upon by a whole lot of parents. Why are they sending their children to these kind of classes? What is the extra that they end up offering? It's great to have some film star talking about 2 tutors per student and all that, but is it leading to any tangible results? These companies, these startups have been there for a very long time, but I don't see any of them any of the students getting into the rank list. What does it actually show? So for me, I think that's more important. When we talk about whether they have reached a dead end, for me, it's all about, as I spoke earlier about what are the extra that they're offering. It could be anything, but at the end of the day, how does it add to the skill sets of a student so that he has a far better chance than any other student who hasn't taken this course? For me, that's the big question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, when so many metrics are being talking about ultimately the one metric that's important is if the student has gained or not, right? So, I'll take that question that you're raising, Mr. Giriprakash, to Mr. Balan. It's a very interesting point that Mr. Giriprakash is raising there. All this is good. It's functional. It's doing well. And we know that people like Mr. Parthi and Ms. Ingle are working very hard to bring out a good product. But at the end of the day, do you see that sort of working out in what really the outcome should be for the student? Do you see that outcome in that student? Do you see the student going forth and doing well in his studies, like Mr. Giriprakash is raising? Do you see them cracking big exams with the help of this alone?
Of course, this is a great supporting factor, no doubt at all. This is giving a good support for the children's learning. They are working in length and breadth to improvise their learning. And as you said, extra, they are getting it, no doubt at all. But another factor is students' interest, whether the student is really interested to learn or out of the force given by the parents, they are taking up that. That is also playing a vital role here. And of course, in many places, students are all not taking a correct decision. They are depending on their parents for taking decision. They are giving up the decision-making thing to the children, whether they want to go for a professional courses or this thing or that, what sort of thing, what sort of app they need to use, everything they are depending on their parents to suggest. So students, since they are being involved without, or they are engaged without their own interest or intrinsic motivation, most of the time it is leading into failure.
All right. Ms. Chandrasekhar, to the same point that Mr. Giriprakash was raising, ultimately the metrics that matter, do you think it's playing out the way it should?
Actually, so I've spoken to a lot of teachers about this, and most of them feel that in terms of outcomes, there is no substantial difference when it comes to online or physical. The only advantage in physical is that the teacher is there and they can immediately read if a child is not understood. The child can immediately kind of approach the teacher, get it sorted out immediately, and that cannot happen so effectively on an online. But as far as learning outcome goes, it depends on so many things. The biggest thing is, as Mr. Balan was pointing out, the child's interest and the child's ability, right? So many times the parents as well as the child, they go wrong in assessing what it is that they really want for themselves, or what it is that they're capable of handling. I think there is a huge mismatch there. So which is why I come back to that point, right? I mean, it is very important for parents and children to kind of go through this and properly understand what it is that this particular app or this program is giving them, and is it really what they are looking for. I don't think learning outcomes can be significantly different.
All right.
With this.
All right. So you summed it up pretty well, Ms. Chandrasekhar. I'll take quick closing remarks. I'll also take it as your closing remarks, Ms. Chandrasekhar. I'll take
Yeah.
quick closing remarks from each one of you. Mr. Giri Prakash, you want to go first for the closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, uh, if you look at the startup culture, if you look at the overall big picture, I personally feel it's very good. EdTech online company, startups should actually prosper, and they should do all the right things. Um, but I find that quite a few aren't able to do so. So I assume there needs to be a course correction for that, and it's for the startup founders to go back to the drawing board to see how they are able to again capture the students' imagination, and and also assure the parents that by getting into these kind of courses, they will be able to achieve a far higher results, far tangible results than what it was before these students joined.
All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Giri Prakash. Mr. Balan, your closing remarks, please.
Online education apps have a hit a dead end that I couldn't agree, because there is going to be a good future, because many of us are depending on that, no doubt at all. But thing is, I'm really afraid that whether overexposure to the children, whether it is going to help them to maintain a good mental health. That's a big fear I have in me. And our children are digital natives. Whatever the controls we put, definitely they know how to break it and go further. And moreover, this education industry is a service industry. If any good content is being provided in an affordable thing, it could have been a better, can be utilized by maximum people in the country. And of course, expectation need to be met with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balan, for your closing remarks. Ms. Ingle, two quick points that Mr. Balan has added is safety and affordability. In your closing remarks, could you also sort of address that?
I think this phase acts like a good wake-up call for us. I think it's great that all of us are having to really reevaluate the business models we have, and also take a very close look at the kind of culture that we are setting in our own organizations and for the industry. My hope is that from this phase, or in the coming years, we are actually setting some corrections in place, because that obviously rubs off on players across the board. And overall, I would be excited to see a lot more innovation coming in, probably in terms of the kind of technology solutions that we are offering, and also solutions that genuinely cater to the masses, where you're genuinely tailoring the content for a set of students that can actually benefit from these solutions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ingle. Mr. Petu, we'll wind up with your closing remarks.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, I think obviously the way we started, I think you're going to have the separation of the good startups from the ones who are mediocre or not getting funded and get shut down. So the separation is going to take place in this period, right? Definitely. I think the most critical thing I want to just talk about is the fact that look at where the industry is, this ecosystem of the number of startups, the number of investors, the amount of money getting into this space. Yeah, I mean, you do talk a lot about, but look at it where we are from the last 10, 15 years. I mean, there's an ecosystem, right? And ultimately that ecosystem is working towards the betterment of the student, the learner, right? So hopefully in the long run, I mean, whatever is the socio-economic classification of this learner, I think there is going to be some bit of innovation, and that learner is going to get a lot of benefit in the years to come from here. And I think this ecosystem is only going to get bigger. I think it's a very interesting time to be, even for a student, and it's going to be great for them.
Thank you for that. It's very interesting that both Mr. Purti and Ms. Ingle sort of use terms like wake-up call and innovation, the road ahead. So very, very optimistic note there, although we were looking at all these angles, all the negative, the bad news that was coming. And like Ms. Chandrasekhar and Mr. Balan were raising the sort of concerns, it did give a sense of gloom there. And Mr. Giri Prakash was raising those points about the need for reinvention. So I think all those put together, we've sort of come to a point where it doesn't seem like all gloom at the end of the day. There is a lot more to look forward to in this sector. So on that note, thank you all for joining us, Ms. Ingle, Ms. Chandrasekhar, Mr. Balan, Mr. Parthi, and Mr. Giri Prakash. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hope to
Thank
see you.
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
He's on.